In this video, we'll be going over how to name covalent compounds. This is our objective and essential question for today. So our objective is to be able to describe a covalent compound and name various covalent compounds using chemical nomenclature. And the essential question that you all should attempt to answer in the summary at the end of your notes from class today is, how do we use chemical nomenclature to name covalent compounds? Again, I encourage you all at any point during this video to pause and write whatever is on the slide down in your notes whenever you see this handwriting icon in the top right corner. So as a review, nomenclature is basically a set of rules that chemists follow to determine the name of a compound. It gives us universally agreed upon names for all of these compounds that we study. Now, a covalent compound, as review, is a nonmetal bonded to another nonmetal via a covalent bond. So if we look at the periodic table again, I'm going to draw just a brief, simple outline. We typically have our metalloids, which kind of have properties of both metals and nonmetals along this line. And then our metals are typically on this side of the periodic table. So I'm going to write metals over here. And our nonmetals are typically on the right side of the periodic table, with the exception of hydrogen. These are our nonmetals. Now, a covalent compound involves the sharing of valence electrons in that covalent bond. So typically, these electrons are going to be shared between those atoms so that both atoms complete their octet or duet. So we can take two nonmetals, for example. We'll take carbon and let's take chlorine. So carbon's represented by C, chlorine's represented by Cl. So carbon, if you look at its position on the periodic table, typically only has 4 valence electrons. Now chlorine, on the other hand, has 7 valence electrons. Remember, they both want to get to 8. So what happens in a covalent bond is that they actually decide to share these electrons with each other. So you end up getting a structure that looks like this. And now carbon's happy because it has its 8 valence electrons, it's octet complete. All the chlorines are happy because they have their octets complete as well. So together, this structure is forming a covalent compound. So all 5 atoms come together to form that covalent compound. So let's talk about how we might name that compound that consists of carbon and chlorine. So I want you all to pause the video and write these steps down in your notes before we move on and go over each step one by one. So let's use these steps to help us write down the names of these 2 examples. So the first step is to name the first element in the compound. So using this first example here, our first element is nitrogen. Then the second step says to name the second element in the compound, changing the ending to "ide." So our second element in the compound is oxygen. Remember, oxygen, we're going to drop that ending and it becomes oxide. So together it is nitrogen oxide. Now this would be great if we were naming a ionic compounds. However, we are naming a covalent compound, and covalent compounds have one more step to them, which is adding the prefixes to indicate the number of each type of atom. So this is going to correspond to the subscripts in the formula. So remember, these are our subscripts. They tell us how many atoms of each element we have in the compound. So our subscripts here, there's a 2 after the N, which tells us there are 2 nitrogen atoms, and there's a 2 after the O, which tells us there are 2 oxygen atoms. So if we were to look on our table here, which you all should have recorded in your notes, our prefix for 2 atoms is di. So all I'm going to do is add di in front of each element, because each element has 2 atoms, and that gives us our full name of dinitrogen dioxide. Now let's look at this second example. Now you all already saw how this second example comes together in covalent bonds, but now let's talk about how to actually name this compound. So following our first step here, I'm going to name the first element in the compound, which is carbon. Then I'm going to name the second element in the compound, changing the ending to "ide." So chlorine becomes fluoride. And then I'm going to add prefixes to indicate the number of each type of atom. So I don't have a subscript here, which tells me that there is only 1 atom of carbon. But I do have a subscript here, which is telling me there are 4 atoms of chlorine. So I'm going to, if I were to look on my prefix table, I would see that the prefix for 4 is tetra. So that is going to be carbon tetrachloride. Now, a quick note about this is I could put mono here in front of carbon. That is not incorrect, but we typically, if there's only 1 atom of the first element in the compound, you don't put mono there. You only put a prefix in front of the element, the first element in the compound, if there is more than 1 atom of that element. So I hope this helps, and I look forward to talking about this to you all in class coming up.